At the top there, policy tracker. If you click there, you'll find something else that is totally different. It's called Open Budget Zim. We have tracked government expenditure since dollarization up to now, looking at sectoral allocations, etc., etc. Because one of the challenges that we have in this country is having a proper repository of data. When you begin to discuss the economic situation in Zimbabwe, there are many statistics fly. We're quoting from the World Bank, from the IMF, etc. Zimstats also we quote, but I think there's one challenge to say, how do we create data? But we have to make sure that that data is something that a citizen, a journalist can use. We have packaged in such a way that it's highly visual, it's easier to follow and to track. But ours is called the Zim Citizens Watch. So we are saying we are part of Zimbabwean citizens, and we are watching government and we are tracking. Like I said, what we use as the basis of our tracker is the manifesto. So we have analyzed the manifesto of the MDC Alliance. We've got it. We said if they win, that's what we're going to use. We analyzed the manifesto of ZANU-PF. We've got it. Now that, and soon after inauguration, that's what went live. Since inauguration, that's what went live. And we've clustered the promises into 9 areas. Promises. We also track what we call brokered promises. I'll explain what that means.
Economic prosperity. We want inclusive economic growth. That's the agenda. That's our
mention of the anti-China narrative, which is not our problem. That is a problem of big power competition. The question we should ask, given what imperialism has done to this continent from the time of slavery, what it did in the colonial period, and what it has done under SAPS as expressed in the mineral sector. When we come to deal with China, how do we apply the lessons of? So
what seems for many academics like an abstract discussion on whether it should be democracy first or development first actually became a concrete issue of choice that confronted many. And for those of them who pushed the line that it was important to mobilize the population around a shared project of development, it was easy to begin to make the transition away from multi-party politics on the basis of which most of the countries of the continent attained independence, and to introduce the single-party idea and practice that came to dominate our continent in the period from the early 1960s to the end of the 1980s.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you have just heard, I am a trustee at SlyMedia Institute. And when I come to such gatherings, I feel like a nest at a doctor's conference. For the simple fact that I'm not in the NGO community, but at least my exposure with CBO has taught me what you guys face day in, day out, and I'm really privileged to be part of that narrative. So SlyMedia Institute has been in existence now for 2 years, and in our lifetime we've managed to create an institution that has made inroads in the areas of public policy analysis and advocacy, in philanthropy, and more recently in the area of entrepreneurship, which basically myself, I'm really interested in that area due to my experience in that space. All this work is done with the sole aim of making Zimbabwe a more inclusive society, a society where the chasm between rich and poor is reduced, which is not an easy thing, but doable. And I'm drawn to what's currently prevailing in our country, whereby there's a generation that is coming up that doesn't have that work ethic or being exposed to the corporate world as it were because of limited opportunities. And we are seeing a lot of stuff happening with our youth, which I think at this point, if not addressed, can become something that is really crazy, and it's a time bomb for our nation of Zimbabwe. And we need to be able to come in and just bridge that gap. We are honored to have you join us in this national dialogue, which is titled State of Zimbabwe Economy National Dialogue. Dialogue comes in many forms, and in this case, it is dialogue between and amongst members of the public, civic society, government structures, and development agencies. We are delighted to have representatives from across the spectrum of Zimbabwe society, which are represented here today. The objective for this meeting will be to focus on sharing ideas on the development of our nation, Zimbabwe. So if you came here and you didn't know what we are discussing, this is basically an overview of what we are going to discuss. We need to share ideas basically on the development of our nation, Zimbabwe, and it is vital in this time. This dialogue is the second of its kind on the state of the economy, even though it's a one-day event, but we are so sure that, you know, with the time that we are going to share today, we are going to make an impact and come out with something that we can be able to use out there. So, by the end of the day, today we should hopefully have achieved the following objectives. Firstly, to provide a platform of non-state actors, civil society, the business community, and the men on the street, and to engage with government and with each other on the current state of the economy, which is very key, like I said earlier on. So we are not oblivious of the task and the polarization that is in our society, and the ripple effects that polarization creates. You guys are better placed to be able to quantify and qualify that. For progress to take place, no society is exempt from the need for unity. We need to be a unified voice, and put all our efforts for the cause of our nation, Zimbabwe. So we as Zimbabweans must create a commonality in the thoughts and intentions of our hearts. This is demonstrated in our speech, actions, and in the attitude we portray towards our country. Because if I can't be able to really live what I preach, it's very difficult for me to even convert the next person. So before you can go ahead and say, I'm Zimbabwean, you must believe it within yourself. Before you can go and preach out there, you must believe the gospel that you're preaching. So it starts here with this group to say, when you are pushing out there for the nation of Zimbabwe and you are saying I'm Zimbabwean and you are saying I'm concerned about the nation of Zimbabwe, are you really concerned at an individual level? Because that's where it starts. So I think from this meeting we'll be able to find ways in which you can be able to achieve that. For Zimbabwe to succeed, we need to have a common agenda for business, for civil society, for the clergy, and for the men on the street. This dialogue process will hopefully create more common ground and enhance inclusivity. Common ground that industry leaders here can take to their institutions. Like I say, you then become an ambassador to say, you know what, I didn't know about this. So many times you are not able to embrace new thoughts or to embrace a new way of doing things or to do the right thing because of biases. A bias can be cognitive, wherein you're just not informed. So because of that cognitive dissonance, you might not be able to do the right thing. A bias can be emotional, where certain things in your heart can't change. But today we are saying in areas that we have got emotional biases, let's soften our hearts and do the right thing. I can give an example from the financial services sector. You get a client who just comes in and say, I don't want to buy in the INSCO share. You ask them, do you have any reason why you don't want an INSCO share? They just say, I don't like INSCO. So whether it's a fundamentally right stock to have on your portfolio, but just because you hate someone, you don't want to do the right thing. So today I'm saying, let's clear all our cognitive biases and our emotional biases for the cause of our nation, Zimbabwe. Then secondly, this forum will be discussing the impact of the Transitional Stabilization Program, the TSP as we know it, on the livelihoods of our people in Zimbabwe. We must look for the positives and the negatives and be able to fully address any challenges the country is facing, either in the generation of good policies, their implementation, and the assessment of our singular and combined progress as a nation. The primary question today that CVO seeks to answer is, what will it take for Zimbabwe to be more inclusive? What will it take for Zimbabwe to be more inclusive? So I've because of the experience that I've on the African continent, you go to different nations, you see different attributes of the people groups, but in some nations, as long as you affect one of their individual or whoever is affected, they all gang up to defend that one. But that aspect, if you look at Zimbabwe, there's a lot of individualism that has crept in this nation, a bit of greed, and I think it's not a good thing. And today, I'm asking you guys to be able to try and address that, because it is a cancer, and that kind of thinking, I can basically classify it as subsistence thinking, whereby your thoughts are just for only you and maybe for your family. And there's nothing left for your city, there's nothing left for your society, there's nothing left even for the men down the street that you live. You're all looking for your own self. But we need to be able to ask and then answer that question: what does it take for Zimbabwe to be inclusive? What will it take for the industries represented here and for the centers of power to facilitate, truly facilitate economic transformation and an inclusive society? So our plenary discussions later will highlight advocacy with government, where the man on the street interfaces with the governance structures on a day-to-day basis. We hope that from these discussions, we will profile the issues and opportunities as we engage office holders on the potential for mutual cooperation and shared progress. By the end of the day, today, we would like to reinforce the role that each person is playing in the development of Zimbabwe and the synergies that must be created for the country to continue moving forward. For the country to continue moving forward. Obviously, the change may not happen overnight, that we are very much aware, but the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, which is an old adage. CIFO is making the step in the right direction of cooperation, and we invite you all to join us in our quest for a more inclusive society. I just want to leave this thought with you. And I got this from my daughter. I think she was still like 5 years old, 6 years thereabout, just starting grade 1. And I was shocked with a little note that she wrote. She came into my office, went into our boardroom, and in our boardroom we always leave this big chair for the chairman. It looks different from any other chair. So she went there and she was sitting there, and this is what she said. And I'm so shocked, like I said. She said, "It looks good to sit on this chair. It feels good. And everyone sees that you are the boss. Daddy, I'm the boss." She was sitting on that chair. And then she then said, "But even if you are the boss, you have to leave the chair and go home. And maybe something can happen to you and someone will sit in your chair." So at that time, when I was listening to that, it was child talk. But when I started listening to that, I then saw that in most times in our organizations, you might be the boss, sitting on the boss chair. It feels good, looks good, and everyone sees that you are the boss. But there's a time that you are going to leave that chair and go somewhere. And perchance someone can come and sit on your chair, who will be as foolish as you were to think that that chair and that title says everything about you. And tomorrow again, that same person can leave that boss chair. So the boss chair is just that. It's a chair. But what do you do while it's in that chair? So whatever role that you have in society, it's a position that you have. It's a privilege for you to be sitting here and listening. Sometimes when you walk down the pavements, you see people who are on the streets doing nothing, and I'm asking God, what difference do I have with this person who's on the street? I just got the options or the privilege for me to be able to go in school and differentiate myself from someone who's begging. So with the position that you have, let it go beyond yourself. Think big, stretch yourself for the greater cause of our nation. So, like I said before, let's really try and move out of a level of thinking that is only about us and nothing is left for others. That's a poor mindset. Today, here, I know with the people who are represented here, we have got rich minds, and we're going to apply ourselves not only for us, but for others. Then lastly, it takes a society to get rid of debt in a society. If someone moves in your society and you don't know them, instead of just being quiet, you need to know who that person is. Because perchance, thieves might be just coming in your hood. And because everyone is doing whatever they want to do, no one is checking on any new entrant on the space. But today, let's check things that have come into the grain of this nation that are foreign to Zimbabwe, and let's address them. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shamba, for those words. Our next topic is going to be on de-dollarization, economic stability, and well-being. And before I introduce that speaker, I would like to really encourage you. This is going to be about 40 minutes long. I'm aware you haven't seen the program yet. So I'll just give you an overview of the next couple of sessions that are coming. So like I said, the next session is about de-dollarization and economic stability. And then we are going to have a plenary session that is open to the floor. That will be about 30 minutes long. So feel free to take notes during this, this session, keep your questions, and then we'll have an opportunity afterwards to ask questions directed towards the speaker, but also directed across the room, okay? And then we're aiming to have a tea break at 10:30. My clock will be saying 10:25 so that we are not late to go outside, and that tea break will probably be about 15 minutes long. And then we'll come back for the next session, which will be handled by Dr. Murisa, who is the director, executive director of Severe Institute. That session will be about a report on, the second report on citizens' perceptions and expectations. So, our next speaker, who's going to be talking about de-dollarization and economic stability, is Dr. Godfrey Kanyenze. Dr. Kanyenze is the director of the Labor and Economic Development Research Institute, commonly known as LEDRIS. And that is a research think tank associated with the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions. That was established in 2003, so he's got a lot of experience doing research in the area of policy making. Before that, he's worked as an economist for the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions. He's got a master's in economics and a doctorate in development studies. Godfrey was on the Presidential Commission of Inquiry into the conversion of insurance and pension values from the Zimbabwe dollar to the US dollar, and completed that work in March 2017. He's the board chairperson of the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust and a convener of the Great Zimbabwe Scenarios Project. Apart from his work at LEDRIS, he is currently working as an external consultant for the International Labour Organization, assisting governments in the region integrate employment objectives in their macroeconomic frameworks. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Godfrey Kanyenze.
Thanks very much, Belinda. I come from civil society, so I normally don't like to be restricted. I feel very restricted even the way I'm dressed, because it's very unusual to do it for civil, because they are such an important player. So I just want to thank Civil for organizing this important meeting. I think we all agree that we need this dialogue on the economy. We have very few dialogues around the economy, around dollarization, de-dollarization, all these issues around us. So I've been tasked to look at the state of the economy, de-dollarization, economic stability, and well-being. And I hardly slept. You know, when you've got a task, you know, it's very difficult. You wake up, there's something in your head, you add another PowerPoint, another slide. And so I've got so many slides, but I'm not going to speak to all of them. I'll be just flashing them because I don't have much time. Most of them will just be illustrating, so I won't spend much time on them because there may be a figure or a chart or a table basically reflecting or summarizing some of the issues that I'll be highlighting. So I've been asked to speak on de-dollarization, economic stability, and well-being. And I'm sure all of us already know the answers. The outline of the presentation is as follows so that I don't lose you. Firstly, I'll look at lessons from past experiences with development programming. Zimbabwe is a laggard. We have been a pariah country, excluded from the developments elsewhere. to the extent that we are way behind in terms of the development discourse. If you go to other countries, Rwanda, even across Zambia, you find that there's so much, that they are ahead of us, even in terms of the narrative of development itself. So I'll start from there, because as a laggard, I think it's important that you begin by learning from other experiences. Before you start running, spend time reflecting on your own past experiences, where you got it right, and other experiences from elsewhere, so that you don't repeat the same mistakes. I think you see why this is important later on. When you look at what is happening now, the crisis, it seems that we do not have the capacity to get out of crisis. We always get from one crisis into another, from another crisis into another, etc., etc. You have to be very clear, once I go through that first part, how we do business as a country, why we are where we are. We can't blame anyone else. It becomes very clear that we can't blame anyone else but ourselves. You remember during the liberation struggle, the mantra was none but ourselves. So we want to get back to that, to look at ourselves, to introspect and say, why is it that we are where we are as a country? That's what I want to do very briefly. And then I'll move on to the macro economic aspects, the fiscal, monetary policies since September. September, that was the new government that emerged following the elections. So Mtuli comes in with a fiscal policy statement on the 1st of October, concurrently with a monetary policy statement. We're going to look at those and the policies that they've implemented. And then I've been asked also to look at the social impact. So the well-being aspect, the social impact of the austerity and currency reforms. And then I'll look at all this debate now, de-dollarization, re-dollarization. Are we de-dollarizing or are we re-dollarizing? Or have we ever de-dollarized? I think some would actually argue that we may not even have had de-dollarized to begin with. And then I'll look at, I love talking about social contracts, dialogue as a way forward. So basically, that's how we will go. So following 2 decades of structural adjustment, what we are going through is very akin, similar to what we went through in the 1990s. You recall the structural adjustment program, which was trying to address structural distortions in the economy that were inhibiting investment, growth, poverty reduction, etc. There are important lessons to learn from that experience, because the structural adjustment has got 2 components. It has got a stabilization component and an adjustment component. So I think it's very critical for us to look at those lessons, because there are a lot of similarities in terms of the transitional stabilization program that we're implementing right now with the structural adjustment program that we implemented. I'll just tease out some of the key highlights from the ASAP period that can inform programming going forward. I'll also look at some of the developments internationally, because the international community following structural adjustment programs, which were also implemented not only in Zimbabwe, but globally, countries were implementing structural adjustment programs. And Tendai and I and others, remember in the 1990s, we were part of structural adjustment participatory review initiative, which was a global initiative reviewing structural adjustment programs. And there are critical lessons that I think can be distilled, that have been distilled from these experiences, that can inform the programming going forward. So we'll also look at those. What is quite interesting is that the World Bank has come up with two very important seminal documents reflecting their own experiences with structural adjustment. And I want basically to quickly tease out some of the nuggets of wisdom that are emerging from that experience. What they say they've learned from structural adjustment, because they were implementing, they were coordinating the structural adjustment programs. So they came up with the 2005 report on economic growth in the 1990s, learning from a decade of reform. I would really encourage you in your spare time, just Google it. It's on the internet. Go through it. It's a very good read. It's a very interesting read. Then secondly, in 2006, they brought together a team of 22 experts in development to look into the few countries, 13 odd countries, 13 odd countries, that had grown at growth rates of at least 7% for no less than 25 years. So they were asking themselves, what is unique about these countries that have grown for so long, for more than 25 years, at growth rates of no less than 7%. There was only one African country in that group, and guess what? Botswana. So we'll look at some of those experience lessons coming. And then, of course, the international community has come up now with the Paris Declaration on aid effectiveness. And then they've escalated it to the Busan principles on development effectiveness. So essentially, they've come up with principles that should inform programming. What informs a good program, a successful program? And I think we want to tease out those lessons. Probably even before we go into dollarization or de-dollarization, we would have already made up our minds why we are where we are and why we are perennially in this crisis that we find ourselves in as a country. What is critical also is that the Growth Commission, which I like very much, says, as I indicated, there were experts that were brought in to basically look at those countries, that the so-called democratic developmental states. What is unique about these states? They are states like us. And they came up with amazing things. They were always referred to as miracles, the Asian miracle. They said they are not even miracles. They did basic things consistently. They were very disciplined, consistent with state capacity. Look at Singapore. Lee would say he was moving with trepidation along a path that had not been trodden. So in essence, if you look at Deng Xiaoping, when he took over in China, his dictum was you cross the river by grouping for the stones. He was not even sure how the country was going to move on. So essentially, they were not miracles. They were ordinary countries with even more problems, worse problems like Zimbabwe. Singapore was just a swamp. And Malaysia refused to annex it. They said, no, you are just a swamp. Why should we be interested in a swamp? And yet 3 decades later, Malaysia had evolved from a low-developed country into a highly developed country. So these are some of the key lessons that we need to. And one lesson that they come up with, which is quite interesting, is that they say one of the major catastrophes of human nature is the refusal to learn from the existing wealth of information and knowledge. So as Zimbabwe, I think we need to ask ourselves, are we learning? Do we ever stop and learn? You see where I'm coming from as we move on. So we'll move on. It's going on strike now. Can you press for me manually? Belinda, it needs a young person, eh? It's age sensitive. Oh, okay, yeah, it's moving now. Okay. The moment it stood up, then it started. Oh, I think it has to do with it. So firstly, lessons from structural adjustment. A key lesson for us in Zimbabwe with the design of our stabilization, because we're in stabilization, is that stabilization is a unique program. And it does certain things to an economy. And I think these are the things that have come out very clearly in terms of the experiences with structural adjustment, where basically most of the countries that have implemented structural adjustment programs, they were able to stabilize their economies at the expense of investment, at the expense of growth, at the expense of employment, and at the expense of poverty reduction. Essentially, they were in a stabilization trap. They managed to stabilize, to reduce inflation, the balances were okay, budget deficits, governments were doing very well, disciplining themselves, so like that, budget deficits were no longer the order of the day. Like most African countries now, inflation across Africa is below double digit. We're in single digit inflation. But the social dimension is what is quite missing. Part of what the work that I'm doing now with the ILO, we are going around in the region, assisting governments. Because in Africa, the Africa Rising narrative, that Africa has been rising with growth levels of above 5%. But then, alas, Africa has not been reducing. That growth is not associated with a rapid reduction in poverty. So part of what we are doing now is trying to see what can be done to induce that growth so that it can become employment intensive, so that it can become more inclusive through value chains, through clusters, through things that bring everyone into the economy, rather than just a few big corporations. So these are some of the issues. So the lessons, basically, after nearly 2 decades of stabilization, is that inflation was reduced, right? With an exception of few countries, GDP remained very low or inadequate in the 80s and 90s. Despite substantial declines in inflation rate, budget deficit, and arguably better macroeconomic stability, investment was very, very low. In other words, the program compressed investment. And as a result, basically, there was very little growth, there was very little poverty reduction, there was very little inclusivity that happened. The simple issue is that this program, stabilization, is pro-cyclical. You are in a crisis, and you begin to cut back. You're already in a crisis. You are cutting back aggregate demand spending. You are actually worsening the crisis. That's what it is. So you saw from the experience of 2008 with the global crisis, the developed countries did not implement these programs, stabilization programs. They came up with fiscal stimulus packages. They pushed in money to push aggregate demand, to activate the economy. South Africa is talking about that now, and they're talking about stimulus packages. Here in Zimbabwe, we're talking about stabilizing. We're in a crisis, and we are further squeezing. And I think it's not surprising now what we are going through. Keynes said, in the long run, we are all dead. So a day without food is one day too many. But if you listen to Mtuli, it's worthwhile, getting through this pain. The social dimension is not even understood. He doesn't understand what it means for someone not to have access to health care today. If you don't have it today, you may die. If you don't have food today, you will die. If you have no sanitation, it kills. Access to water. We are failing the basics. Water is life. Health is life. Food is life. And yet we are struggling with the very basic fundamentals of development. A country that cannot feed itself, collect rubbish, sanitation, the beans. When we grew up, we knew when the Matador beans would come, isn't it? And we'd chase them in Glenora. Matador bean. We knew exactly every Wednesday they would come. But now if you see them, it will be a miracle, right? We can't even collect beans. The roads can't be navigated. And for the colleagues that love football, you are in distress because all the stadia have been condemned. So when you play your local soccer, you have to find to play elsewhere in another country. Your home games have to be played in another country. Why? Because we are failing even to maintain the stadia. So we can't do basic things. These are the issues that we want to discuss and look at. So stabilization is problematic from a conceptual framing, from its own design. Being, a process of reducing aggregate demand. So in essence, it worsens, aggravates the crisis. There are so many studies, even the World Bank is coming on board. They are highlighting those things. I won't go into detail. You can later on get the report and you look at the report. So they basically are saying also that there is a problem. We have undermined investment. So you cut back even your infrastructure. And infrastructure is very important even for private sector growth because it crowds in private sector investment. When you create an enabling environment, when you have got infrastructure in place, when your railways are working, etc., it makes it easier to do business. So now when you are cutting back in this stabilization and you say now we are stabilizing the economy, you're killing companies that may not even wake up the next day, isn't it? After you are done, as someone wrote, is it worthwhile to burn down the whole house to discover roast mouse? So essentially, that's what stabilization does. Diaz Alejandro in South America actually came up with that concept. So essentially, these are the challenges. And also, essentially, they're also saying that we have to be very clear from the outset that leaving anyone behind is problematic. You spend much time in conflict. You have to ensure that all groups, whether it's young people, women, people with disabilities, marginalized communities, are included in the growth dynamic. So you empower them. Amartya Sen's idea of capability deprivation. He was talking about it, that it's a right of every person to have the capacity to contribute to the growth of the economy. That's why we're now talking about pro-poor, shared, broad-based, etc., all those adjectives that are defining a different trajectory. And one of my favorite economists, Robert Solow, he was at Massachusetts Institute of Development. He says, in many ways, the more equitable the growth, the more sustainable it's likely to be. Because there will be less controversy, less disagreement, less resistance, and also there is an enormous amount of talent in populations that needs to be tapped. Excluding some parts of the population, whether by gender, age, or ethnicity, from the benefits of growth, loses the talents that they have. So in my view, it is not only desirable that they go together, it's useful that they go together. I think that sums it up. We can even close there. We can even begin to interrogate Zimbabwe, our own experience. Whether we are ensuring that the young people, we see this later on, whether they are included in our growth. Then I'll move on to the lessons from the Paris Declaration. They came up with principles, 4 principles that are critical. after challenges of aid, etc., effectiveness, they came up with those 4 principles. That for any program to succeed, it must be nationally owned. There must be national ownership. The people must say, yes, that is our program. Can we say that of TSP? Can we say that of our programs? You say, oh, it's their program. It was launched by government. So essentially they said it's critical that government leads with stakeholder participation. Government leadership with stakeholder participation to engender broader ownership of programming. If there is no national ownership, the programs may not succeed. You may remember the Chinoi heroes, or whatever you want to call them. They thought that they were going to liberate the country because they had the guns, access to the guns. The lesson from Chinoi, after being exterminated, ZANU-PF stopped the fighting. They dropped all the weapons. And then they had learned a big lesson that the war cannot be won by just those people with the guns. They had to translate it into a people's war. They had to mobilize. They stopped fighting and started mobilizing the communities so that the people became the water and the fighters became the fish. And that's how the liberation of this country was done. Likewise, development has to be people-driven. Has to be, right at the center of development is about people. Development is about people. We often forget it. We think it's about commodities. We have commoditized development to the extent that it's no longer people that we put at the center. People may miss healthcare. We don't care. As long as the budget balances. As long as inflation is low. We forget that. We need to put people at the center, at the heart of what we do. So essentially, we need to go back to that human-centered approach to development. Then they came up, once you have come up with a nationally owned program, everyone aligns what they are doing with the national program. Everyone now harmonizes what they are doing with the national program. There is accountability on results-based accountability. You don't talk about activities. You talk about results, as the theory of change insists. You know, I talk about that, we went to Mtare, we did it, so what? What happened? What's the result? We want results. We don't want stories that were in Vic Falls. We talked about SDGs. So what? What has happened? What does it mean for a woman in Chipinge, in Lotito, etc.? So we need really to focus on accounting for results. And then the last one, mutual accountability. So these are the principles that were developed, and they were translated into the Busan in Indonesia. That's where the meeting took place on development. That was, the first was aid effectiveness. Now it was escalated into principles on development effectiveness. For development to occur, what are the principles that should inform? Most of them are very similar, like ownership, focus on results, inclusivity, transparency and accountability, and all these aspects. So in essence, you can see what is critical. Lessons from Zimbabwe's ASAP. I was reading, we were working on a project, and I was going through some World Bank documents, and I decided just to hive out some quotations from there, what they were saying about our own structural adjustment and what they learned. And listen, they said, the World Bank warned about fixation with technocrats who may underestimate the importance of national ownership of programs and their social impacts. Because they say under ASAP, they would meet technocrats in the Ministry of Finance, and that's zero. And they would convince that these guys wanted reforms. But it didn't work, because at the back, the political leaders did not buy into the idea. So the whole reform agenda did not work. So they said the key thing is not just about agreeing with technocrats. Right now we've got Mthuli Ncube has come as a technocrat, isn't it? And everyone is amazed when you look at his credentials. He was at Oxford, he was at Cambridge, he was at... And we are so impressed with the credentials. But that's not what will bring development. So essentially, the World Bank was saying it's not about technocrats. It's about the buy-in of the political leadership. I think that's why I was saying it's not about economics. It's the politics around it that is critical for sustainability. So they also say the bank should not have relied so much on commitments with technocrats in absence of political dialogue and consensus for reforms. Underline that. Consensus. This is the World Bank. It's not a radical institute like Civio. This is the World Bank saying that consensus is critical for reforms. In a relationship with a reluctant reformer with distinct lack of ownership from top political leadership, the bank should remain consistent on requiring that conditions be fulfilled and not proceed to lend on the basis of promises. They say the Zimbabwe case demonstrates the importance of popular ownership and participation throughout the process of adjustment. An open, transparent dialogue can help generate realistic expectations, reduce uncertainty, and contribute to a unified sense of national ownership of reforms. We are into currency reforms. Did we even have dialogue in Zimbabwe? Whether we want to monocurrency or... We didn't. We just saw, the minister even told us the day before that they will never introduce a Zimbabwean dollar until the macroeconomic conditions are correct, including reserves of no less than 3 months import cover. And then the next day he introduces the Zimbabwean dollar. So even from his own analysis, the introduction of the Zimbabwean currency was premature. So the issue of dialogue is critical on anything and everything that affects us. They conclude, unless the program is seen to be generating benefits for everybody in Zimbabwe, it might not be possible to follow through with and maintain the momentum of many of the recent policy changes. This will require dealing more effectively with poverty and with the social dimensions of adjustment. Right now, we're railroaded into currency reforms. We do not even look at the social impact. We are supposed to do social impact analysis ex ante, not ex post, not after the event. And we should have come up with flanking social dimensions, social protection mechanisms to deal with the poor people. Now we are almost surprised. Oh, kuna varombo. Oh, kuna vanhu vari kufa. Hakuna ichi. You should have actually known this. You should have known through your programming. So these are the issues. These are the lessons from experience. It is the World Bank saying this, not Civio Institute. So you can see these critical 10 issues that are emerging from the lessons of experience that we should have imbibed as a country, that should have helped us to inform our programming. So the other aspects that are critical is, in the case of Zimbabwe, we need to look at our own very constitution. Right. I skipped. At the SAPRI meeting that I highlighted, that we had in 1999, the then World Bank country director said something so profound. Here in Zimbabwe, he said, we had problems with ESAP. It failed. That's what he said, Tom Allen. He said it failed because growth needs to be inclusive. You see, you are going back to that. Partial deregulation without a restructuring of the geo-economy creates social tensions and not enough jobs. Social sector expenditures need to be protected, and targeted measures to deal with poverty should not be seen as add-ons, but an integral part of the program. Even our currency reforms, poverty measures, flanking measures of social dimension should be an integral part of this. So you can begin to see already where we're dropping the ball, where we're missing the 10 as a country. So the World Bank also says getting the prices right and making markets work better are important, but these need to be complemented with measures to ensure that the unequal balance of power of those who can readily engage in the market and those who cannot does not lead to dangerous levels of social tensions. Already we've got cartels that are controlling few people, as the monetary policy statement stated. 50% of the balances in Zimbabwe are controlled by 200 entities. So essentially, the rest are out. So you see now the fights even within the party. The youths are restive now. They are now exposing, naming and exposing. It's the same party. So without cohesion, you cannot develop. So you can see basically where we are losing it. National ownership is critical. He reinforced again those. So for those that are interested, I also included those reading. So that on your own, you can just begin to read and become like a Professor Masunungure. How should we do business as a country? Our constitution is very clear about how we should do business. How should we go about programming, national programming. The Constitution section 13, subsection 2 says, it obligates government to involve the people in the formulation and implementation of development plans and programs that affect them. I put it, you can go and look on your own. The Tripartite Negotiating Forum Act that was put into law on the 5th of June 2019 says that the function of the TNF shall be to consult and negotiate on social and economic issues and submit recommendations to cabinet. Section 3.6 says the forum shall foster cooperation of the tripartite constituents and consult other key stakeholders and contribute to the formulation and implementation of social and economic policies. So you can see there the emphasis again in our own laws. So our own laws are also emphasizing, highlighting. How does our state do business? I'll quickly run down these issues because I think we can help each other. You can shout out. There's no problem. You can shout if I missed something. How do we do business? Fixation with short-term considerations, firefighting mode. Someone was talking about March, same. You were saying, I'm inviting you in March. I said, no, my calendar is not, I haven't gone to March. As Zimbabweans, we are so fixated with short-term. Development is first of all seeing the longer-term vision, isn't it? Without the vision, the Bible says the people perish. You start with a vision, and the vision emboldens you. In the short term now, you are chasing something big, something that you want to achieve over time. So without a vision, then any road takes you there. So you need a vision. You need a longer term horizon. But with us, we are all fixated with short-termism. That's the way we've been doing business in Zimbabwe. Top-down, big bang approaches. Top-down, there's hardly any dialogue. Policy and institutional incoherence, inconsistency, uncertainty, unpredictability. No one can predict, isn't it? Even next week, what will happen? We're operating in a very difficult, hazardous environment. Even as organizations, it's very difficult to navigate this treacherous terrain called Zimbabwe. It's uncertain, it's unpredictable, it is incoherent, it's inconsistent, etc. We talk about open for business, which is contradicted by very difficult doing business environment. Companies are running on generators. How do you compete when you're running a company on a generator? 18 hours outage. How do you on earth compete? And this has gone on for more than a year. You are gone as a company. To rise again becomes difficult, isn't it? You are gone. With all these water shortages, fuel shortages, it's getting even worse now. The concept sits uneasily with command agriculture. You see, at the same time, we're saying we're open and we use other narratives that actually negate what we are trying to do, command agriculture, etc. And we'll talk about that later on. We have used a lot of SIs, statutory instruments. Last year, when we came up with the currency, I understand that there were 258. Some are saying there were as many statutory instruments as there were days in 2019. So the statutory instrument now is trying to explain. We were trying to say, when we introduced the SI 142 on the currency, we were trying to do this, we were trying to explain. So the first, it shows that the design was not good. Huh? You did not do a proper. If you had consulted, if you had sensitized, simulated, you therefore foreknown some of these outcomes. But now you see now all these on fuel, the governor has to come to re-explain what he meant. I did not mean this, I meant that, and so and so. And it goes on and on. So if you are running in an environment like this, it's treacherous. It's very difficult to do business. In spite of our narrative of being open for business. Deteriorating governance indicators, juxtapositioning dialogue and repression. There are so many dialogue platforms now. All of them taking place at the same time. It's so confusing. Pollard, there's the TNF, there's the National Economic Consultative Forum. There are so many of them. There's the Presidential Advisory Council. So many advisory councils, but what are they advising? You ask yourself, what advice is cabinet getting out of all this? If you are advised properly, then we must see a reversal of the wrong things that you were doing. But if you see now you are going deeper and deeper in crisis, and the dialogues are even worsening, simply they are shepherding the crisis instead of arresting the crisis. So these are the challenges. Estrangement from traditional development partners and processes. The developmental states looked at the world economy as an elastic source of demand. The small city-states of Hong Kong, etc. They saw the world as a huge demand for, elastic demand for your exports. So they did not just look at themselves, but Zimbabwe, we've been estranged from the international, we are hardly integrated, etc. And we've gone on since 1999, and we are comfortable. How many years since 1999? We are comfortable moving in the wrong direction. Okay, I'll speed up now. Focus on external re-engagement and FDIs. We haven't even discussed the role of local investment, etc. Even dialogue amongst ourselves. You saw what Naledi did, Pando. She organized a seminar on Zimbabwe. And she said, no, guys, SADC, yes, we're the day on sanctions on Zimbabwe. But even if you remove sanctions, they won't address the Zimbabwean crisis. The first thing is for Zimbabweans to dialogue. There must be a convergence within Zimbabwe itself. So these are the issues that we need to talk about. First of all, we should say, guys from outside, stop there. We were talking to each other first. We close doors and talk. Once we agree, we open doors. And for them, it will be easier. Because they'll find a Zimbabwe with a shared approach, with a shared vision, with a shared direction in terms of where we're headed. Now, if they open up and see Labour is saying, no, don't come here, someone is saying, and then in the end, there's disconnect. There's a disconnect there. So arbitrage, rent-seeking behavior, and corruption. It's not, I mean, it doesn't pay. Younger children now, your child was saying good things, but some of them are saying it doesn't pay to be honest. Because they see dishonest people being rewarded, richly rewarded. So in essence, we need to go back to these issues: arbitrage, rent-seeking, lack of broad-based ownership. These are key issues. Just look at our programming since 1980. We've had more than 17 programs. I'll just look at the latest ones. Just look at the medium-term plan, 2011, 2015, during the GNU. We abandoned it in 2013, isn't it? Right? On the guys that, no, it was a GNU thing. No evaluation, no assessment, no monitoring was done. And then we moved into Zimbabwean. And then we came into 2018. Mutuli comes, no evaluation of Zimbabwean. We move on. No evaluation, no assessment, no learning from even our own experience under Zimbabwean. And we move on as if nothing ever happened. We move with a new program now, Transitional Stabilization Program. And then we see now the Zimbabwean 10-point plan, the interim poverty reduction strategy paper. It was not implemented, that one. It was just adopted, but it could not be implemented because re-engagement did not take off. Then we have now the Transitional Stabilization Program. We agreed on the principles for success. Is there national ownership? Is there alignment? Is there harmonization? Is there accounting for results? Is there mutual accountability? All those principles that we highlighted, that we drew from international experience. Now the TNF basically is a stabilization program. Its role is to stabilize the macroeconomy, pricing, the foreign exchange market, etc. That's what it should be doing. But look at what Mutuli is saying now, the Minister of Finance. He's saying, oh, guys, we are done with stabilization. In the 2020 budget, he's saying, now we're moving away from stabilization. But the economy is even worse off, isn't it, from a stabilization point of view. We are destabilized with inflation levels in December of 521, right? The foreign exchange market itself is volatile. It's not even stable. And it is the pass-through. That's why inflation is passing through, isn't it? From the exchange rate. The money supply growth, which is not being managed, pushes volatility in the foreign currency market, which in turn leads to inflation. So we haven't been able to monitor those things. And now we're saying we're done now. There's no analysis or evaluation, national analysis of the TSP program. So essentially, there's SMP, you can read on your own. Now look at our growth. Zimbabwe is the blue one. Then the red one is Sub-Saharan Africa. We used to outperform an average Sub-Saharan African country in the 80s and 90s. But since the crisis, Zimbabwe has been outperformed by an average Sub-Saharan African economy that have gone through reforms and taken advantage of the strengthening of demand for primary commodities. And there's growth elsewhere, whether it's Zambia, we used to laugh at Mozambicans. They are now laughing at us. We used to laugh at people in Botswana. They are now laughing. They used to come here for education. In Bulawayo, go to Bulawayo. A lot of people from Botswana, but now they laugh at us. Why we are behind? And look at our progression. Since 1998, you see the growth has been was negative. And for 10 years, we lost a whole decade. And can you imagine a country that is going the wrong direction and people go with confidence in the wrong direction for 10 years without anyone blinking or even asking, where are we going, guys? 10 years! And we were good at developing narratives. It's sanctions. It's someone else. It's exploitation from businesses. Businesses, you have been called financial terrorists recently again. We have gone back to narratives again. Use of narratives to explain away our failures. So that's what we do now. If it's someone else's sanctions, then I don't have to do something. I have to wait for my enemy to come and release me. I call them my enemies, and I still give them the power now that, my fate is in their hands. So that's part of the challenge. You see there now, in the GNU, the economy was doing reasonably well. There was a rebound, which was driven by mining. You can see there, they've revisited the growth trajectory, right? They've rebased to 2012. You can see growth averaging almost 14% between 2009 and 2013. We had election 2013. We went back now to our old ways. Our old ways, okay, that's fine. Our old ways, fiscal indiscipline, re-emerged with a vengeance. We went back, it was just arrested during the GNU. After the GNU, we went back now, fiscal profligacy, fiscal indiscipline, re-emerged with a vengeance. And these are the challenges. And then we started borrowing from the Reserve Bank. We started borrowing from crowding out even the private sector. So essentially, basically, that has been the source of the massive growth, rapid growth in money supply, which has fueled inflation in this economy. So essentially, if your child comes home with a report card, which looks like this, World Economic Forum, Global Competitiveness, 127 out of 141. World Bank Ease of Doing Business, number 140 out of 190. And you have given the courage to tell your parents, I did better, I improved. I improved from 155 to 190. The difference is the same. So essentially, this is our report card. And if you read the budget statement, it is celebrating the 15-point movement in our ranks from 155 to 140. In the budget, the minister was saying, guys, we have moved 15 places. This is good for the country. But I've been working in Rwanda, dear friends, look at starting a business. We have moved, this is the latest, from 176 to 167. Can you celebrate just the ease of starting a business? So this is how we are. This is our ranks. So you can see all of them, including corruption, 160 out of 180. So you can see basically the report card, you look at it on your own. An example from Rwanda, the most consistent reformer. Rwanda in 2010, following the establishment of the Rwanda Development Board, it moved 76 places in 1 year. Say, this is the reform now, decisiveness on the part of government. It moves down, not celebrating moving 15 positions, 76 positions. And right now Rwanda is around, it's got a very low, 29th. In 2019, it was now 29th in the world in terms of ease of doing business. So essentially, you remember we did the 100-day rapid reform, OPC driven, and then we extended it to another 100 days. And it seems now that it has lost steam. But it has lost steam when we've just moved 15 places. We look exhausted, we look fatigued. And yet there's still so much that we still have to do as a country. So essentially, I like this, it's from the Reserve Bank. Liquidity comes mainly from export earnings, 60% on average. Remittances account for 28% on average. This is from the central bank. FDI is 5%, etc. But the challenge with Zimbabwe is not, we get a lot of, even given the economy that we have, if you look at our levels of exports, they compare favorably with the normal economies like Kenya. But essentially the challenge with us now is the management, the bottom line. Imports. We are now depending, we have a culture of importing manzondora. Anything and everything is imported. And we are very proud about it. Bachir, we are proud of importing. If I were to ask what teams, even on N58, which teams we support, Liverpool, Man U, it's also, no one will come up and say I support Dynamo or I support Caps United. So essentially, that's okay. That's part of the challenge. But the worst bit is this last bucket, illicit financial flows. Right now, the gold that used to go to Fidelity is no longer going as much as it used to because of what is happening in that gold sector, Shurugwi, whatever you call them, right? And it's a country, by the way, with an army, with an air force, with an intelligence, etc., etc. And yet we are now being run by one Bemba. So essentially, we need to ask these strategic questions. This is very important. The diamonds from Chiazo, I think Joao tell us. Even Mugabe told us. They disappeared. We have nothing to show. No result. We said we need to account for result. But we have a resource, diamond, God given, which was alluvial. It was not even complicated. It was alluvial on the surface. God cannot be more generous than he was to Zimbabweans. The minerals, the climate, the educated people. The worst thing is to have very educated people who are very, very poor. So this is part of the challenge that we need to look at. I want to go into these aspects, exports declining because of time, debt, we're in debt distress, we can't even repay our debt. Can you imagine if everyone knows that Murisa doesn't repay debts, no one will give him any money. So you can't say it's sanctions. Yes, I sanction you because of your behavior. You don't repay. So that's part of the challenge. Let me just very quickly, you can see what I was saying earlier on, the credit is going to government. Now, it didn't used to be like that. But now, since the 2013 election, you can see there now, all the credit is actually going to government. Weak institutions. Institutions are important. When we grew up, everyone wanted to work for the parastatals. We wanted to work for Air Zimbabwe. If you saw an Air Zimbabwe bus pass, you would turn your head until it disappeared. If there was a PTC, those trucks with ladder, you would look at it. There were institutions, but you look at them now. Institutions matter. They are critical for development. Even the police force now. You see, as we drive, youngsters, street kids directing traffic. Can you imagine? And yet we've got a police force. Our institutions matter. So these are critical issues. 2 minutes. Sorry. Yeah, I think. Then the aspect on fiscal and monetary policy. Since September, we've come up with those measures. I think we are all aware, the separation of nostro foreign accounts, the 2% intermediated financial taxes, removal of one-to-one exchange rate, etc., liberalization. And we are all aware of what has happened. What has happened is that it has opened the liberalization has resulted in massive chronic levels of inflation because of the exchange rate, which has been unstable following the introduction of the Zimbabwean dollar. So the challenge now, if you look at where we are now, if I was to look at the issues in terms of the impact, because you can read this on your own, money supply, we are failing, struggling even now to control money supply. Why? Because of the quasi-fiscal activities of government. So essentially, government is even destabilizing the interbank market itself. When we were on the retreat in Kadoma, the government colleagues were even saying it openly. The problem now is government procurement. Government is a huge market procurement. So they take that money, whether it's command agriculture inputs, they give it to one person. And that one person comes down onto the market, the interbank market. And the market basically is destabilized. That's what is happening. It's not coming from elsewhere. It's government itself. So essentially, it was coming from government officials, actually. So essentially, you see now, as a result, even foreign direct investment has come down to 250 million from 745 in 2018. So the challenges, we are all aware of them. We've been talking about them. Are we re-dollarizing? That's why I wanted 2 minutes, so that we just hang on to that, because that's the critical bit. That's the juicy bit, and that's the reason why you invited me. De-dollarization or re-dollarization? You need to negotiate as well. So the problem now is that the Zimbabwean dollar was into any money plays 4 functions. It is a unit of account, it is a store of value, it's a medium of exchange, and it's a standard for deferred payments. So if your currency cannot play those roles, no one wants to hold on to their currency. That cannot protect, hedge wealth. So now when this Zim dollar was introduced in June, on the 24th of June, inflation was already 176%. So it was no longer able to do what it was supposed to do. And nobody is homo economicus. We're all economic human beings. We operate rationally. So a rational human being does not want to hold on to a currency that does not what? Preserve value. So even my mother in the rural areas understands this basic economic tenet. And she will refuse if you try to buy a cattle, a cow, using a currency that she doesn't believe will help her to buy another cow or to store that value. So essentially, that's the challenge that we have, that when the Zim dollar was introduced. But it's not just that. Government came up with exemptions. There are so many exemptions now. We're talking about the fuel, we're talking about exporters, so some people, some groups never experienced the de-dollarization. Because like us in the NGO sector, we are part of the aristocracy, right? We remained in the dollarized world. The majority now are not in that space. So essentially, some are able to hedge and protect value, others are not. In essence, you see also the problem now, the challenge that is emerging with even government itself, exemptions for passports, exemptions for fuel, exemptions for even minimum capital requirements. They are now quoting them in US dollars. But you're saying, no, that's not our currency. So that is already a contradiction. So there are so many contradictions. The issue of multiplicity of statutory instruments, the shortage of cash. And the minister said, no, if we have to drip feed the economy, because if we put too much cash, then to create inflation. But we don't say the same thing about the quasi-fiscal operations, where the actual money supply growth is coming from. So essentially, we have destabilized the economy ourselves, and naturally, the market has been re-dollarizing. You go anywhere now, even those that are charging rentals, even the real estate agents, they used in December, they were just pegging those in. They just put it for legal purposes, but they are also juxtaposing. So we're in a dual, if you want. We're in a dual monetary system, where basically, so the quasi-fiscal activities are actually fueling the challenges. And I think we've got examples there. And we have put so much money into agriculture, command agriculture, billions of dollars. And the return is what? Is just a 1.5 yield. Our yields are 1.5 tons per hectare. Zambia is 2.5. South Africa is above 6. So if you look at the budget is upbeat that now we're done with stabilizing the economy. Now we're moving towards growth, towards productivity, towards job creation and poverty reduction. How do you eradicate poverty or move towards growth or even productivity when you don't even have access to fuel, access to electricity? The economy is not stabilized. It becomes difficult, isn't it? The issue of phasing of the reforms, isn't it? You first have to stabilize, but now we're saying, no, we are compounding the challenge now. If you are struggling with just stabilization, now you have added onto stabilization the growth dynamic, you've also added the productivity, competitiveness, and the poverty reduction aspirations. So it's now more complicated than it was earlier on. So these are the challenges that we are facing, ladies and gentlemen. Lastly, I just want to, in terms of social impact, if your salary is very easy, most incomes are now below 20% of what they were a year ago. You were earning, say, $500 before 24th of June. All of a sudden, by just changing Chivaka Shure, kutia kun ZW, watofa, watonyura, watoparara, ngochinja Chivaka Shure. That in itself, destroyed you. So that's what we have done. And we did not, I was at a meeting, IPMZ meeting, I was presenting, and we had the deputy governor of the Reserve Bank. He was asked, what do we do with these contracts fairly early after what do we do now with these contracts? The people's contracts are in US dollars. He said, oh, we never thought about it. And yet programming, when you introduce new programs, you must be able to simulate, to do sensitivity analysis, to do social impact analysis. Remember in the UK, they were refusing to assent to the proposals of Boris, because they said you did not do a social impact analysis. Where's your social impact analysis? So I'm almost done now. I just want to read a quotation. It's so important, Belinda. Please. I beg you. It's refusing to. Okay. Keynes summarized it very well. Keynes, you can easily see, I don't have to say much about the social impact. Look at pensioners, people on fixed incomes that are getting 200 Zimbabwean dollars. It is 10 US dollars. Can you imagine? Someone who worked overtime and was contributing it was a solid currency that they were contributing. Most of these people that have retired worked when the money had value. But now you are retiring into a crisis. I won't talk about all this, the labor, what has happened now, the shift now to agriculture. There's even a reverse migration that we don't talk about from urban to rural areas. Because the urban poverty is very excruciating, it's very painful. If you're poor and you're in urban areas, you have to pay for everything. So you better go kumusha. And this is what is happening. More than 1.14 million people have actually gone back to the rural areas, according to a World Bank study. So essentially, you can really see there the increased role of agriculture and the demise of manufacturing, of industry. We've gone through a 2018 study on shadow economies in the world. We've got the third largest shadow economy in the world after Bolivia and Georgia. So Zimbabwe, is now in 55% to 41% now in sub-Saharan Africa, the region with the slowest pace of reduction in poverty. Ours are still above 70%, which is atypical. So, in conclusion, Belinda, Keynes foresaw this way back in 1919. And he said, Lenin was certainly right. There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. To debauch is to destroy, to debase, like what is happening. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and does it in a manner which not one in a million is able to diagnose. And even earlier, Copernicus, writing about the Prussian and Polish governments in 1525, observed, although there are countless maladies that are forever causing the decline of kingdoms, princedoms, and republics, the following four, in my judgment, are the most serious: civil discord, a high death rate, sterility of the soil, and debasement of coinage. We are debasing, eroding our coinage. So no one, it can no longer play any role. And the economic activities cannot happen when we've got a currency that cannot play the role of money. And I think these are the challenges that we face. So what we need, basically, we were in Kadoma. I've included some of the things that we agreed, how to stabilize the macroeconomy. CZA has been talking about it. Most countries are now moving away from a single mandate towards a dual mandate. The central bank just does not focus on stabilizing the prices. It also looks at a social objective. Because stability is just a means to an end, and the end is poverty reduction. So they are now putting in their macro framework a dual target, and you can look at this. Going forward, what is required is what I was talking about, going back to those principles of dialogue, convergence, so that we discuss these issues going forward as a country and agree, not just leave it to the technocrats or the economists or the politicians. It involves you and me. It affects you and me, and nothing about us without us. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you very much. So can you take a seat on the white chairs? So we're going to do 10 minutes, 7 minutes actually, of question and answer, just to get clarification on any points that you didn't specifically understand. Dr. Nyenze will be available between 11:30 and 12:30. We've got more discussions speaking directly into specific industry challenges later on with different leaders from industry. So if you have any specific thing that you did not understand and you just want clarity on, you can ask a deeper question later so that we can catch our tea break. Anybody? Everything was clear? Okay, brilliant. So let's go for tea. Our tea break will be short. Okay, there's a hand. Okay.
Dr. Kanyenze, thank you very much for your very energetic presentation. Now, my question is, it's obvious that introducing the Zim dollar was a mistake. But what is so difficult about just dumping the Zimbabwe dollar like what we did in 2008? I mean, can't our leaders see that that we're on the edge of that we're about to fall into an abyss? Thank you.
So we'll take 3 questions, and is there anyone else you can ask after this question, and then we will have those answered and we'll take our
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Doctor, for your presentation. My question also relates to the issue of the currency issues. The use of the Zim dollar, local currency vis-a-vis the US dollar. Some argue that the use of local currency gives us much more room in terms of and autonomy. What is your view in the case of Zimbabwe? Should, in the current situation, should we go for the US dollar, or we go for the local currency? Thank you.
last question, so we can answer them all at the same time.
Good morning. Dr. Nyenze, I read in the media a few days ago, I think it was earlier this month, that the government, actually the finance minister, gave a tax redemption to a Chinese company, Huawei. I'm not too sure if I pronounced it correctly. I wanted to ask, what are the implications of an action like that, given that as a country we are still trying to generate income? Does it make sense? I mean, like, is it an action to try and attract more businesses into Zimbabwe? But then, to what extent that they, does it then try to and play into the government effort to try and generate more income for the country?
Doc, or anyone else who would like to answer those quickly? Doc. Okay.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll be very quick this time, Belinda. There's nothing wrong with having your own currency. As a concept, there's nothing wrong with it. But it goes with responsibility. There's a sovereign responsibility. You have to ensure that it's stable. You have to ensure that it's of value. You have to ensure that it allows your business to be competitive. So the advantage of having your local currency is that you can have more tools as a government, monetary policy tools. Because if you're using someone's money, you cannot actually use monetary policy tools. You no longer have a central bank that can play. When I was at the central bank during the GNU period, I mean, there was no monetary policy to really talk about because we didn't have our own currency. So there are all those benefits, but it comes with a responsibility. it must be something that can play the role of money. I've highlighted the 4 roles: unit of account, means of payments, store of value, and standard of trade payment. So right now, people are not running away from the Zimbabwean dollar because it's called the Zimbabwean dollar. It's because of what it is, what defines it, and what it can do or cannot do. That's why we are not running. We are running. So it's actually rational for us to begin to choose a currency that has got value. The problem with the US dollar, for example, is a reserve currency. It's a very strong currency. So it undermines competitiveness. You saw what happened during the GNU period. It really destroys your industry from a competitiveness perspective. Because it was cheaper for South Africans to import, to export their things into Zimbabwe than for Zimbabweans to do the reverse. Because the rand was weaker. So in essence, that's why there's this debate now about randization. The rand, because of the closer relationship, South Africa and Zimbabwe, and the fact that it's our largest trading partner. So these are the issues that we need to discuss. As I said, there are no simple answers. That's why we need this dialogue, to sit down and look at the pros and cons, and eventually come up with an understanding. Once we agree, then we move on the basis of what we've agreed. That's why that first principle is very critical. Then the issue of the Chinese, etc., exemptions, etc., and so forth. The problem with all that is that when something is selective, then it becomes problematic. It's discretionary. It becomes problematic. If you give one person some discretionary favors and that are not open to others, it becomes difficult. And these are the problems, the new distortions that are emerging, where basically we do things knee-jerk reactions. Oh, we are desperate. We need this like now. We need fuel. Because the queues are longer. It's getting political. So we say now, anyone with free funds, you can go, without looking at the implications. We're actually undermining the very thing that we did of actually creating a monocurrency. When we begin to have these exemptions, etc. And they are expanding. The more they grow, it's no longer an exception. It becomes the rule. So essentially, they are now facilitating the re-dollarization, which is not what they want to do. So that's why I didn't talk about it. The tone in the 2020 monetary policy statement. It's more like rhetoric running ahead of actual practice, where they're saying that once we exercise fiscal discipline and we stabilize the prices and the exchange rate, we are going to achieve money supply growth of 5%, and inflation is going to come down to 50% by year end. It's a wish. But as we know, if wishes were horses. Thank you.
Very much, Doc, for that great presentation. So like I said, if you have more in-depth questions about anything that the Doc presented on, or if there's any specific applications that you want to ask about, whether you think that would work, or any specific contributions in terms of policy, you can ask during the discussion that I said is going to be taking place later. That will be between 11:30 and 12:13. Right now, we're going to take a tea break. It will be a short one, 15 minutes because I think it's about 11:45 now. We need to be back at 11 o'clock so that we can keep to time, okay? So if we get to 3 minutes to 11, please feel free to bring your cup in here and finish off your tea in here, okay? So we'll be back at 11 o'clock sharp.